All right. Well, hey there, hi there, ho there, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are coming to us from around the world. I am Dawn Zoldi. I'm your host for this Drones at Dawn podcast, and it's so great to be back, somewhat live stream. So, by the way, the chat is live. The Q&A is live. So, if you've got comments, questions, positive encouragement, go ahead and layer it into the Q&A button there. That'll be awesome. We'd really appreciate that. We are rounding out Advanced Air Mobility Month, and what a journey it's been. And we kicked it off with Felipe Varon, and we had from Varon Vehicles, we had Peter Schmidt from Transcend, we had Jason Pritchard from eVTOL Insights. We even had a special evening bourbonar with the crew from the Urban Low Altitude Transport Association. So if you missed any of that, head to my Patreon page, check out my YouTube. It's all up there. It's also on Interdrone's Launchpad. But what a way to end the month with no two greater people than to round out this month. And we have with us today our guests, Rex Alexander from 5 Alpha and Yolanka Wulff from the Community Air Mobility Initiative. If you're in this space, these names should not be a surprise to you. If you're new to this space, these are two people that you're going to want to get to know. You're going to want to follow on social media and through their websites and different initiatives. So we're going to talk more with them right now. And so let's just go ahead and do that. Rex, could you please just let everybody just maybe that 30-second elevator speech about your background?
Sure. Yeah, I've been in aviation pretty much all my life. So I started flying when I was 14. Got into the college at Parks College of St. Louis University, graduated there, spent 5 years on active duty in the Army learning how to fly helicopters. Left there, went to the oil and gas world, spent 20 years in EMS. During EMS, I started designing heliports, and that turned into a part-time job. A full-time job is now a full-time business. And during that journey, met several people in this new eVTOL world, and now I'm working with NASA and the FAA and multiple other players to include, I'm now the infrastructure advisor for the Vertical Flight Society. So yeah, pretty cool adventure to say the least.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to dig deep into a lot of the things you just talked about, and including the Vertical Flight Society. If you all, again, are into electric vertical takeoff landing aircraft and advanced air mobility, and you're not a member, I'm going to ask you why, because they put on some great events. Rex is at the forefront of many of those events, especially on the infrastructure piece. So you want to check out VFS, Vertical Flight Society. Yolanka, please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Thanks, Don. And hi, Rex. Great to see you today. Well, I've had a convoluted career that actually you all may not know. It started off in veterinary school and went from there to ultimately law school, actually with the goal not so much to be a lawyer as to work with mission-driven programs. So my career has mostly been as a consultant, occasionally attorney for nonprofits and startups. And about 12 years ago, it was through that a client approached me about starting a nonprofit to focus on the electric aviation industry, and then invited me to join him in that. And I was hooked, and I've been involved with electric aviation for a dozen years, and in various positions, but always focused at the strategic and policy level, growing the industry, bringing visibility to the industry. And most recently with my co-founder, Anna Dietrich, founding and now serving as executive director of CAMI, the Community Air Mobility Initiative.
Well, let's pick up there then, Yolanka. Tell us a little bit more about CAMI and what it is that you do as part of CAMI.
Sure. So Anna and I, actually in a bar in Brussels, decided that after multiple industry meetings where we kept hearing about how this technology was advancing, but nobody was having conversations at the state and local level with the communities where advanced air mobility would be implemented. We decided to form CAMI to fill that gap. So CAMI is an educational nonprofit. We work virtually, we work globally, and our mission is to support local communities in the integration of that third dimension of transportation into their transportation system. So how do we do that? We do that through education, communication, and collaboration. And we work, our main stakeholder group or audience are state and local public agencies, transportation planners, business owners, etc. But we're supported by a broad swath of stakeholders, which is really important to us. So we're supported by industry members, by other organizations, by airports, by transportation departments, etc. So we hit those three goals through a number of programs, including a growing library of resources that we're developing, which you can find on our website, communityairmobility.org. We do a lot of presentations, conversations like this, like all of us. We're online all the time. And you know, before and hopefully soon again in person. I think the three of us are scheduled for Colorado Springs in a couple of months. Mm-hmm. Yay! And then we have one of our signature program is the Urban Air Policy Collaborative. That is a program that we developed that its goal is to really develop that common voice and peer network for state and local agencies to understand, learn about what advanced air mobility is, understand the opportunities it might bring to their community, and build some baseline model policies and best practices. So we have two programs within the UAPC. One is our cohort program. It's a 5-month-long intensive for public agency staff. We've just wrapped up our second one. They meet every other week for a couple of hours, and we go through a quite robust curriculum as well for them, as well as discussions and brainstorming. The other is our forum, which is a regular hour-long get-together that includes those public agencies, but also our CAMI members and our expert contributors. And shout out to both of you as expert contributors at CAMI to tackle specific problems and discuss how, as bridging from industry to local agencies, we can solve these problems. So those are the core problems or core programs at CAMI, and that's really our focus in this industry.
Well, so much to peel back there. I want to jump on a couple things you said. I want you to keep me honest and remind me to talk about Flight Crowd after we talk to Rex. Okay. But before we do that, I want to say, for everybody out there, Yolanka just mentioned that she, Rex, and actually a gentleman named David Fleckenstein from the Washington State Department of Transportation are on a panel together for the NASAO, the National the National Association of State Aviation Officials. They're holding their annual conference here in my hometown, Colorado Springs, Colorado. So very excited about that. If you're not tracking it, you might want to. It's September 11th through, I believe, the 15th. And we're going to be on a panel Tuesday for that particular event. And they're flying here. So I can't wait to show you around town. And it's going to be awesome. So, and we're going to be talking about vertical, flight and infrastructure and community acceptance, taking some of these themes a bit further in that panel. So definitely tune into that. You mentioned the term infrastructure, Yolanka, and kind of working with the state and local folks. And I think that's a great segue to talk to Rex, because Rex, you said you've made a career now out of, your heliport background. And, it's translating over to the vertiport realm. And so tell us a little bit about what you see as the greatest challenges. Let's pick our top 3 challenges at the state and local level for vertiport infrastructure.
No, I would say one of the top challenges right now where we're at is there are really no policies in place. So when a municipality goes to do this, with a heliport or an airport, they have policy on the books that says, here's the process, here's what it needs to look like, here are the people involved. We don't have that yet for vertiports. So that's one of the key elements, I think, is getting policy in place from the federal level at the FAA, the state level at the DOT, and then the hardest level is then the municipality level. So we get into zoning, conditional use permitting, fire code, building code, all that is centered at that level. So those are all in that policy piece. I think beyond that, a good second would be public acceptance. We're not sure what that looks like yet. And having dealt with that in the helicopter world, I can tell you it's interesting because you get into a lot of people that, while they say, hey, that's really cool, I don't want it in my backyard. And if there's a lot of people that say, hey, I really like to fly an eVTOL, really want to do that, but I don't want you landing and taking off in my backyard. So that's going to be an interesting thing. So I always tell clients in this space, I said, be proactive, have a message, have a team that goes out and actually works that public policy piece, engages the public, and you'll probably do much better if you just leave it alone, because once you leave it alone, there's a void, and that void of information will get filled. And
Yeah.
it's never filled by what you want it to be filled.
Never. Absolutely. You gotta drive the message.
Exactly. You have to be driving your message. Then I think after that, as far as some of the challenges we get into in the local area, we get into I'd split it into 3 specific areas: safety, noise, and property values. Those are the 3 questions you have to answer. Is it safe? Can you prove it's safe? What's the noise level? How loud is it? Is it going to be annoying? Is this going to impact my property levels? Is it going to make them go up? Hey, great. Is it going to impact them negatively? Is it going to make my property value go down? And when I do heliports today, those are the 3 primary pieces that the individual is going to ask you that question.
Well, that's also a great segue into telling us a little bit more about what you do in 5 Alpha. You kind of alluded to it, but I never actually asked you.
So 5 Alpha is kind of a culmination of about 23 years. I started out in the part-time world with my own company that was RJ Alexander Group, and then went into a full-time partnership with Heli Experts International. Left there to take a position with Uber Elevate and worked as their head of infrastructure for a while, and left Uber, and we just parted company. We turned around within 24 hours and signed a contract with Uber and stood up 5 Alpha about 3.5 years ago. So in the past, it was all heliports all the time. Now it's about 50-50. I'd say we still build heliports. I'm developing one in Miami right now that's going to be one of the tallest ones in the United States. It's on an 85-story building. So we still do that. We still do wind tunnel testing. We still do public hearings and all that. But the other 50% of the company, we've really dived in with both feet, working with the Vertical Flight Society, working with the Federal Aviation Administration, NASAO, as you spoke with. We're always having conversations with them, and then doing R&D in this space with NASA. So I've got so far 5 contracts working with NASA in developing what this new transportation mode is going to look like under 5 Alpha. So it's been exciting. It's been very mind-numbing on some days, but very exciting.
Well, I know it's mind-numbing because you and I talk all the time, Rex. I'm actually strategic, Truth in Lending. I'm strategic partners with both CAMI and 5 Alpha and Yolanka and Rex. And I talk to Rex pretty regularly, and I know that you are one of those few people in the world that, like me and probably Scott Schofman, who's out in the crowd, he's kind of a super fan, pour through those regulations and read them, word for word. And Yolanka, obviously, as an attorney, does the same thing. You mentioned Miami, and rip straight from the headlines, a sensitive time to be putting up big buildings in Miami. So not sure what's going on down there. Pretty horrible circumstance. But I know you're also working with Felipe Varon, who I mentioned earlier, Varon Vehicles down in Colombia, and so that's really exciting, Rex, because when you think about those 3 prongs you talked about, the first being kind of policy/regulation, second, community acceptance, third, like safety/noise, maybe that bucket of all these other things. The regulation piece is kind of interesting in Colombia, and the fact that, Felipe and you will have an opportunity, I think, to shape that, because it's probably a little more malleable for companies that are going down there to have that direct connection. Before Yolanka, before we get to, really deep into community acceptance, a little bit of a foil between CAMI and Flight Crowd, I want to talk for a second about this policy regulation piece that Rex mentioned, and really ask both of you. So Rex, you and I worked together on an Insight on Manned Systems magazine piece about a year ago. Some of the key hurdles for vertiports and advanced air mobility, and this idea that there really are no regulations for vertiports, that people have been using the advisory circular for heliports, but the FAA's new AC, that the updated version of that, outright says do not use this for heliports. And so I know you were involved in that and you've provided comments back. My question to you, and then for the audience's edification, is what are they supposed to use then? I mean, because we had nothing else, and it's like, all right, this is the next best thing. Use the heliport advisory circular, at least it's something. What now?
No, that's a great question. Now, I would point out that the current advisory circular from the FAA is still 2C. The new one that you saw, the one you referred to, is still just a draft.
Got it.
It has not been published yet. Now, I know that there has been conversation amongst the industry and OEMs with the FAA as softening that language. Now, what's that mean? I don't know, but there is discussion.
Okay.
In that space, there's, what the FAA says, and that's primarily around the geometry of the landing site as well as the airspace of those sites.
Yeah.
The other ones I would point out and pay very, very close attention to are the ones that are designed around fire code and building code. So the ones we work with there, the International Code Council, the ICC, has International Building Code, International Fire Code. Then the other group that we just did kick off a major project 2 weeks ago is the National Fire Protection Association.
Yes.
So NFPA 418 is heliport standards, and we just stood up a task group 2 weeks ago to specifically design and start development of fire code for vertiports. Now you want it fast, but it takes a while, and to look at accidents over the years, and we get into a lot of the design, because it's the boring stuff that kills you. It's not paying attention to that little minute stuff that you go back and you look at, and it's like, why didn't you do that? Well, it was cost too much, or it was inconvenient. We would have to redo something, or there's all kinds of excuses we get into after the accident. But it's like it's the people pay attention to the really scary stuff. It's the boring stuff that they gloss over and blow off.
Yeah. So let's you keep me honest, Rex, and let's talk about your recent report on heliport accidents and some lessons learned that can translate the vertiport. So put that on pause for a second. But I want to rewind a little bit, because I think we're all talking and we have a level of knowledge that other people may not have. The fact that most heliports even are not governed by the FAA. They are not public. They are not publicly funded. They are privately funded. And that's where Yolanka's piece comes in with the local and municipal kind of education. So Rex, if you could give us maybe that 30-second kind of overview of public versus private heliports, kind of what that landscape looks like. And then I want to jump to Yolanka to talk about, how she then is helping educate the local folks, not just on what advanced air mobility is and the goodness it can bring, but those regulations that are then needed if it's not federally regulated. So
Sure.
Rex, over to you first.
So when you look at what you can call it, there's two primary categories: public use, private use. There's also ownership: public use, or public ownership, private ownership. The use case is the one that we're most interested here, in that if it's public use, then the FAA has some authority. If it's private use, the FAA doesn't have any authority. When you look at the numbers for the United States, there's 58 public use heliports in the United States. Out of that total, there's probably right at 5,800 that are private use. So less than 1% do the FAA have any authority, and total authority only comes with AIP funding. There's only one heliport in the entire US that's actually really accepted and used AIP funding.
And that's the Airport Improvement Program, the AIP funding that you're talking about from the FAA.
Correct. Federal grant money. If you use federal grant money, then you have to meet the FAA's AC. So I know that you and Yolanka and I have had many conversations. Well, what are these? What are vertiports? Because they're going to have volumes that rival many of the regional airports. Well, if we call them private, the FAA then doesn't have any oversight. I think the other piece, and I'll finish here, is if you are private, the FAA can't help you protect your airspace. That's all on you. And you then have to go through something that's really a hot topic right now, setting up an easement. And that is a challenge. Been down that road many, many times. So, or zoning. And zoning is a great thing, but the problem is it's political. And if a political office changes hands, you can lose your zoning. It's the easement that's a concrete take to the bank type thing, but it's a challenge.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think people realize the complexity of this as you've just laid it out. This idea that you'd have to radically change the paradigm that we have for heliports, for vertiports, if you want a FAA governance of them, and that's you kind of the ground piece, right? And you said something, Rex, and then we're going to go to Yolanka. You said something that I want to jump on. Some people will disagree with what I'm about to say, but I would suggest that even, kind of over public property, right? The idea of air rights and easements still exists, because if the government is going to use that air and someone below it owns a piece of that air, then that easement will have to occur, right? And so you see this even, kind of in public property as well, where they're having agreements. Like when I was at the Air Force Academy, we have a private railroad that goes through that property. It's not air, okay? We're talking ground. But the point is, we had to negotiate an easement with, right, public land with a private owner. So even public land, right, there's rights that attach to that. And so, this idea of, how does the FAA fit in here in general, even with drones, and now with vertiports and advanced air mobility, I would say triply complex. Yolanka, tell us a little bit about, what you're doing in that space then, vis-a-vis, hey, everybody, did you realize that, we need some kind of governance, some kind of policy or regulation at the local municipal level to make this all work?
Sure. So I think it's important to kind of zoom out to the 30,000 foot level. I think, those of us in the industry often joke about aviation being siloed, but aviation, when you zoom back out to that 30,000 foot level and you look at aviation as a form of transportation, it has existed virtually separate from every other form of transportation. And it's separately regulated. Airports are physically segregated from the area around them. Whereas when you think about most metropolitan or regional transportation systems, and you're talking about heavy rail, light rail, buses, bus rapid transit, all of those forms of transportation that you find in a metropolitan region, they're connected, they're integrated. And up till now, this has been a technology push market. This is the convergence of technologies such as electric and distributed propulsions, autonomy, data networks that have given us this opportunity. But it hasn't come from a demand side. It wasn't that communities came to the aviation industry and said, can you tell us how to expand our transportation system into the third dimension? So that really is the genesis of CAMI, is going to that demand side and saying, until communities and their decision makers understand what this is, they can't even start to think about what the opportunities are. they also are not going to understand what all the potential adverse impacts are. So it's a challenge for the aviation industry in that for the first time, they have to think of themselves as an integrated mode of transportation. And while the FAA certainly governs safety in our skies and manages air traffic, where the local communities have a say is exactly in zoning and land use planning and transportation planning, and thinking about how these landing places integrate with their transportation systems. And so yes, once they're there, once the flights are happening, that's the FAA that's going to govern that airspace. But where they go and how they integrate and what the impacts of putting a vertiport in a certain place are or will be in the future are of great concern to communities. They want to make sure that there's broad public benefit, that we've limited adverse impacts, that we've addressed issues like affordability, accessibility, equity. They do not want to repeat the mistakes of the 1950s when the federal highway system rolled out and isolated or segregated neighborhoods and caused displacement and gentrification. So local communities are very aware of this. So yes, we need to educate them about the aviation aspects of advanced air mobility, but we also need to really explore the broader impacts of this new form of transportation and understand how it fits into and integrates with existing transportation, both from a planning perspective and an operational perspective, real-time operations, as well as regulatory.
Absolutely. And so we're now kind of in that prong too of community acceptance, and you're focused obviously in CAMI on kind of that state, local, municipal government level. So that's maybe a good way to talk about Flight Crowd and how your work is complementary to Flight Crowd, but different.
Sure.
So could you kind of explain kind of what their space is and how you work together?
Yes, start off with apologies to Flight Crowd if I'm misstating in any way, but let me say we love Flight Crowd. We talk regularly, and we think that our missions are very complementary. So Flight Crowd is focused primarily on the general public and educating the general public about advanced air mobility. They also have some great programs for students, and they're focusing on universities and looking at workforce development and building excitement about for young people to get into this new industry. CAMI is focused much more at that local public agency, transportation planner, elected officials at that level to help local communities understand what this is and how they plan for it and integrate it. So I think we have at our core, we come from the same place. We have similar language that we use, but we have a different mission and different target audience.
I think that's a great explanation. We talked about this on Clubhouse, by the way, folks out there. If you're not on Clubhouse, you should be, and join our Drone Law Connections discussion every Thursday at 11 a.m. Mountain and 1 p.m. Eastern. We had Rex and Yolanka on there. It was such a phenomenal discussion. We had a guest from Wing that showed up, so that was kind of cool, and some of the usual suspects. But yeah, we had Maria Taranovska from Flight Crowd on Clubhouse a couple weeks ago, and she and of course Felipe from Varan Vehicles, they started a name challenge, because you just said something that words matter, right? Like what is this new language? I just saw something yesterday that I think it's the Drone Advisory Committee came out and recommended to the FAA that they not use the term airman with respect to eVTOL as they're looking at this, that it should be aviator. I mean, that's just the start of, kind of gender neutral language and things like that. Will unmanned go away? What is this going to become? It's going to be interesting. We're at interesting times indeed. But Rex, let's go back to you. And just in our, couple minutes we have here, is so much to talk about, but so little time. Let's talk about safety, that last prong, kind of talk safety, noise, things like this. But you just issued a report about heliport safety, some accidents that occurred, some lessons learned. So number one, tell folks where they can find that report. And number two, if you can maybe distill that down to maybe the top 3 tips that translate over to vertiports, that would be really awesome.
Sure, no problem. In that report, it was several years of work going through and looking at that information. What we tried to do, and what our scope was to look and see what were the causational factors that we could point to specifically at accidents occurring at infrastructure. In this case, we looked at airports, heliports, offshore sites, and then really did a deep dive. And in that, we found certain causational factors that were reoccurring. And we developed several different pieces of that puzzle that we were kind of not expecting. Number one, we knew we'd find accidents. We knew we'd find specific factors. The factors that jumped out were, having been in this business for a long time, didn't surprise me too much, in that obstructions. You built a heliport and then you put all these obstructions to airspace, either at the heliport or in the approach departure path. You built it too small. You tried to put too many aircraft in too small a space. You designed it with one approach departure path. And lo and behold, a pilot tried to get in there with a tailwind, got into settling with power, and the aircraft crashed. The key is in almost over 90% of these accidents, they were all predictable and they were all preventable. So we get back to that whole, well, that stuff's boring. Yeah, that's the boring stuff that kills you. So we go back, and when we look at this next generation of vertiports, we want to make sure that we have the appropriate amount of airspace around the landing areas so that they're not going to hit something. We have the appropriate airspace coming in and going out to the landing area so that they're able to maximize their performance. We don't want them doing downwind operations. There's a big push in this industry to do something we've never really done before, and that's put a lot of these landing areas in downtown urban environments. Having worked in that space for a long time, I can tell you it's a humbling experience when you get in there and Mother Nature is trying to kick you out. You have to take a lot of those factors into consideration in designing this. So when we looked at the accidents, we looked at the winds, the turbulence, and things like that to figure out, okay, what was going on in this space. And again, it was one of those that was a nearsighted decision to put a landing area in a site that shouldn't have been. So when we look at this future, that's one of the key takeaways, I think, is proper planning, doing your due diligence, paying attention not just to the 2-dimensional piece of concrete, but the 3-dimensional airspace and the impact. It's what's the environment's impact on the aircraft. Then we also look at the impact of the aircraft on the environment. One area that's kind of interesting right now, that anytime you talk to an OEM, I would suggest you ask them what their disk loading for their aircraft is. We had that incident about a month ago in the UK where the V-22 was landing and taking off from a hospital in the UK and moved the entire walkway from there to the next county because of the extreme rotor wash. Rotor wash is tied to disk loading. And the higher the number, the higher that velocity. So an average aircraft that's in the helicopter world is running about 4 to 6 pounds per square foot. V-22 runs about 22 pounds per square foot. That equates to about 83 miles an hour of wind. That's a small hurricane. And if you've ever seen any of the YouTube videos on the V-22, you have to be very cognizant of where you land and take off. Looking at eVTOL, what does this impact have on the environment? What does this impact have on the neighborhood? They're ranging around 12 to 16 and in that space, higher than helicopters. So that's something I'll be interested in paying close attention to.
Well, your work is really going to push this industry forward. So thanks for everything that both of you are doing. in this space. And we're going to have to close out here. Unfortunately, I know there's questions we didn't even get to because there's just so much to talk about, but maybe close it out with, what's the best resource? If each of you could give one resource you would recommend that folks go to learn more about this space and the work you're doing. Let's go ahead and do that. And then we'll have, and there's a question that just came in, so we'll try to take that. But go ahead and tell us what resource you would recommend. So Yolanka, you first.
I'm cheating a little bit because I know what Rex is going to say, and I support what his answer is. But I've got to point to our own website and say we've got a great set of resources that we've developed, and on top of that, we're getting ready to launch an additional page on that website with a curated set of outside resources. We're in the process of organizing those as well. So we wanted to create a page that was not just a collection of everything, but that was actually curated and organized. So I will point to our website, communityairmobility.org, with a shout out to Rex's answer.
All right, go ahead, Rex.
You know me quite well. Thank you, Yolanka. So no, and this is one of those things I talk to a lot of people about that are in this space that are trying to get in this space specifically. And it's like, how do I keep up with the information? I said, it's almost impossible. It's happening and changing daily. Probably the one group that I work with on a regular basis that does a very good job of that is the Vertical Flight Society. So when you look at that, they have their newsletter, they have their membership. If you're a corporation that are looking to really have a footprint in this space, you can become a corporate member. There's a lot of information flowing constantly on the front and the back side. If you're a member, you can have more, but even on the non-members, there's a lot of stuff that the Vertical Flight Society publishes on their YouTube site for free. So if you go to the website, vtol.org, VTOL.org. The other group that I'll point to real quick, a great friend of mine, Alon Head, who is a editor, runs evtol.com. And she is doing a fantastic job of keeping up with this space. So that's the second place I would point to.
Yeah, that's a great point. I've recently worked with Elon on a couple of articles, one for her Vertical magazine and another for the evtol.com. So definitely check out evtol and Elon Head's work. And you can check out my website, P3 Tech Consulting. I got some of that on there. I answered some of those questions just in the chat. We're just running out of time here. So, and we do have a guest from Portugal that gave us a shout out. So pretty cool to have, the global community here with us today. So thank you so much for joining us. Real quick. So thank you again, Yolanka and Rex. Really appreciate you and taking this time. This is a close to our Advanced Air Mobility Month. Check in with us next week. We are going to have the amazing Maggie Schuster. She's down in Texas and doing incredible things with the North Central Texas Council of Governments, including their Know Before You Fly Your Drone workshop. So next month is all about education, training, and workforce development. And the future of this industry, whether it's small drones or large VTOL aircraft, it's going to come down to those three things really when you think about it, because we're going to need that workforce that's able to maintain these vehicles and fly them eventually, even if some are autonomous, right? So more to follow there. Check us out. Maggie will be on Clubhouse this Thursday, again, 11 a.m. Mountain, 1 p.m. Eastern, the Drone Law Connections room. So join us there. So that'll be a preview to next week's podcast. So hope to see you all there in the Drone Law Connections room. And so long, Houston and Lisbon and everywhere else. Thanks for joining us. And that's a wrap. So out here.
Thank you.
All right. Looks like